Korea celebrates Labor Day on May 1st, and in light of this occasion, on Issues and Insiders today, we explore the environment for work here in the country, including the overall conditions, the pressing concerns, and potential countermeasures. Welcome to Issues and Insiders for this Labor Day, May 1st, here in Korea. I'm Min Sunhee. Today, we address the labor environment for workers here in the country. And for this, I have Professor Song Soo-young at Chung-Ang University live on the line. Professor Song, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
I also have Kwon Soa with us. Soa, welcome back.
Happy to be here, Sunny.
Right, so let's begin with the results of a survey that apparently show job seekers here in the country are more interested in working conditions than in wages. Tell us more.
Right, Sunny, it looks like Koreans would rather work in favorable working environments than just make lots of money. So let's take a look at figures by Statistics Korea that have been cited by a report by the Bank of Korea that looked into the preference for working conditions and changes in the Korean labor market. Among key factors that people consider when choosing a job, 31.5% of respondents in 2023 said the working condition was important. And that's up from the 28% level in the previous 3 years. And what's more, it by far exceeded the 26.8% that were more interested in the wage level last year. Until 2018, wages were deemed more important than working conditions. But in 2019, the trend reversed. And that trend continued, especially following the COVID-19 pandemic, during which people experienced the positive aspects of flexible work and working from home. Now, these two were actually among 8 categories that the researchers of the study set to define working conditions. Apart from flexible work and working from home, were work intensity, autonomy, as well as demand in physical labor. Now, jobs with good working conditions were more likely to be preferred by women, younger workers, and those with higher education.
Right. And Professor Song, Soa mentioned flexible working arrangements. Now, pundits say flexible working arrangements, including remote work, will create a more inclusive and accessible workforce for South Korea. What do you say?
Yeah, now recently, since the outbreak of the pandemic, and clearly the labor workers have some worry about this, some working together and in the very closely. But therefore, as a result, then they're looking for the job, so which can be executed and carried out their responsibility or duties online, or some remote work is preferred. Has made some research report about the effect of some such environmental work condition over the wage differentials and change of the wages. So relative effect of the work condition and accessibility could how much could play some wage differential created. But when I see there's some Bank of Korea's research recently, they actually tested some reverse causality. The level of wage has an impact on the way what is the females' participation ratio and several other demographic issues in that. So to that regard, I have some concern about whether the Bank of Korea's research outcome is plausible or not. But clearly, as Soa has mentioned, that the effect of work condition and the people would like to replace some wage level with some favorable work conditions. So it means favorable work condition has some pecuniary effect on the people's attitude towards the wage level.
Right, indeed. And so last year, women in Korea earning hourly wages or salaries reached almost 10 million, a record high, I understand. But their working environment, I believe, remains little changed.
Right, so that is good news and at the same time still much room for improvement. So why don't we first take a look at the exact figure released by Statistics Korea earlier this month. The number of female wage earners hit 9,976,000 last year. I rounded it up to 9.98 million, an increase by more than 280,000 from the year before. Compared to 10 years ago, an increase by around 2 million. Now going back to 60 years ago, it's a 17.4-fold surge. Not only is the close to 10 million number of female workers an all-time high, but also the percentage of the gender making up the total workforce, which is 45.7%. Now, back 6 decades ago, that was at a mere 24.1% and has since been gradually rising. Among the female wage earners last year, close to 69% were fully employed or regular workers, around 28% were temporary workers, and 3.2% were daily workers. Now, while women have become more and more economically active in Korea, when it comes to the wage level of women and men, there remains a significant gap. Statistics Korea, in a report last year, cited data that showed Korea's gender wage gap stood at 31.2% in 2022, which is the biggest gap among 35 OECD countries, and the OECD average was 12.1%.
Right, I see. Professor Song, concern has been raised about Korea's youth unemployment in recent times. What do the numbers actually tell us, and do these numbers, Professor Song, worry you?
Yeah, but before talking about this youth unemployment rate and the employment rate for the youth, I'd like to mention some comments about the SOA's report about the recent pay gap between the gender pay gap in Korea. Actually, Korea was notorious because almost 31% has been there is a pay gap, which is the largest among the more than 31 countries in the more than OECD countries. So the average was, as of 2021, it was 11.93 percentage points. So the problem was actually we have seen the female participation in the employment rate has been dramatically increased since the outbreak of the pandemic. But this is true to both countries, South Korea and Japan. So the problem was actually Japan has successfully implemented their policy to invite the female workers to make a contribution to the GDP growth. But however, in Korea, the problem was even though female participation rate has been increased, the impact was relatively less significant. And let me talk about the youth unemployment rate among the G20 countries. In South Korea is currently, as of in the year of 2023, it was 5.03 percentage point, so which is relatively lower. And the largest youth unemployment was in South Africa, which has reached more than 50%. So as for the youth unemployment, because at the level of 15 years and people younger than 29 years old, usually they participate in the labor market. Also, they just idle away and they're looking for their jobs. So that's why relatively youth unemployment becomes a little bit always higher. So what I'm concerned is the GDP growth rate of South Korean economy has really maybe a long-term effect on some youth unemployment. So I'm concerned whether this kind of youth unemployment level and the tendency has been embedded among the population, and then that could have some burden on the long-term growth rate of the South Korean economy.
Right, of course. So another topic of much interest among workers here is the broader adoption of the 4-day workweek policy. What is the latest on that front?
Right, there are a number of companies here in Korea that are giving it a try, and I recently had the experience when I contacted a person at an education platform that I'm working for on a Friday, and then I heard that she's working from Monday to Thursday as the company has just recently adopted such a system, so I wasn't able to receive some kind of data on that specific day. But some conglomerates also introduced a 4-day workweek-like system, including Samsung Electronics, POSCO, and a number of SK companies like SK Telecom and Hynix. The reason why I said 4-day workweek-like system is that while these companies do offer employees a day off, most of them require their workers to work the same amount of hours a week, meaning the same amount of work has to be completed within 4 days. Meanwhile, what's mentionable is that it's not been that long that Koreans have been working for 5 days a week or have been going to school for 5 days instead of 6. Although a 5-day work week has been in discussions since 1996, it wasn't before the early 2000s that people started to work 5 days a week. So what about other countries that have already adopted and even generalized such systems, such as in Europe? Belgium has a 4-day work week. Norway and Denmark have a 37-hour work week. France 35, and is even considering to reduce that to 32 hours. And many go by the 100-80-100 rule, which is a model referring to 100% pay for 80% of work time while maintaining an output of 100%. The U.S. is following suit as well, with almost a third of large U.S. companies exploring reduced work schedules, according to a recent survey. And Singapore just announced this month to implement flexible work arrangements starting in December this year.
Right, well, good to know. Professor Song, the potential adoption of a 4-day work week has triggered quite a bit of debate over its pros and cons. What do you believe are some of the main issues of contention?
Yeah, according to the data, we have witnessed some the contribution of GDP by the labor work because clearly, as Soa mentioned, Denmark and Belgium are such countries they have adapted some 4-day a week work hour. So per work hour, GDP contribution has been great for some advanced countries. But however, in South Korea, we have witnessed some clearly the productivity has looks increased for the last decade, and the issue was, as I mentioned earlier, because of the displacement effect of the digital technology, and then what actually happened during the pandemic era is the lowest wage earners has been laid off at first. So therefore, that could have some effect on the wage, as been productivity has looks increased. But however, as the wage level, the economy is in the recovery phase, and then those people who accept some lower wage could have employment opportunities. So that has effect on the wage increase, looks a little bit moderate. So the problem was because of the productivity work hour, the longer the work hour, actually clearly the lower the productivity of the GDP contribution by the labor workers. And to that regard, we need to think of some reduce the work hour and instead help encourage the workers to have a more leisure hour, because more leisure hour clearly is normal good, and that could have a positive impact on the productivity. So I think positively this adoption of the 4-hour work is could have a positive effect on the productivity and as well as to the economic growth rate.
Right, the 4-day workweek policy then to ensure better work-life balance. Professor Song, all that being said, what are your prospects with regard to the full adoption of the 4-day workweek policy here in Korea in the near future?
In the near future, I don't think it will be adopted soon, but the problem was because we have now, there is some mix-up of older generation and the younger generation. So older generation has they tended to think of the less of work hour, and they do not want to lose some income earning. Therefore, even though their productivity is very low, still they would like to work longer hours. So, but the problem was because they become old and then productivity necessarily reduced. Therefore, what we have to do is some flexibility and accessibility to the older generation, because older generations' productivity is low and they cannot work longer hours. Therefore, some flexibility of the jobs would be very important for the older generation to be employed. And for the younger generation, what is needed is just a very focused work during the just 4 days a week would be very well accepted by the younger generation. So this means that depending upon the age or depending upon the generation, we have to be flexible enough to implement the wage policy and the workout policy. I think that would be a necessary step in the near future.
Right, indeed. Meanwhile, Soa, it's been over 2 years since the implementation of the Serious Accident Punishment Act. It's been made to better, of course, ensure the safety of workers in the work environment. What has been the impact of this particular act on workers themselves?
Well, first, a recap of what the Serious Accidents Punishment Act is. This law punishes the top decision maker for failing to fulfill duties that led to industrial accidents that caused death or serious injury, with up to 1 year in prison or a fine of 1 billion won, roughly $730,000. This act was passed in January 2021 and took effect a year later. Since late January this year, the scope of the act has been expanded to include businesses with 5 to 49 employees. So the main intention is to eventually prevent workplace accidents by making CEOs and owners take more care of potential harms. According to data by the Ministry of Employment and Labor last month, there were 584 fatal accident cases reported, with 598 deaths. That's a decrease by 46 or 7.1 deaths and 27 or 4.4% fatal accidents from the previous year. When including unofficial data from 2021, before the law was enacted, when 683 people died in work accidents, it's the first time that the figure dropped to below 600. By industry, 303 people died in the construction sector, 170 in manufacturing, and 125 in other industries. That's a drop by 11.1, 0.6, and 5.3% respectively. There was also a decrease in fatalities at both workplaces with 50 or more employees and those with fewer than 50 employees. So it is difficult to say that the implementation of the law has resulted in the drop, as in the case of smaller companies, it just came into effect this year. But I will leave the analysis to Professor Song.
Right, and that being said then, Professor Song, what is your assessment of the Serious Accident Punishment Act?
It's like some posterior punishment against some serious accident, and because of some kind of ignorance or lack of attention to take care of the safety and the security of the labor workers. So we need still, because of the reputation effect, we need this kind of posterior punishment as necessary step. However, what we actually need is to protect the labor workers, and is very important to maintain the labor productivity, because of the damage on the labor workers could have a negative impact on the productivity of the labor. And also, if the government would like to encourage the participation of female workers and the old generation, because we know we are in the phase of some demographic change, and then because of the reduced birth rate, and clearly we fall short of the labor supply. So that caused a serious problem, because as you see, recently the China growth rate has been reduced dramatically. The main primary reason is believed to be some one-child policy since 1980s. So 1990s. Therefore, after 30 years, clearly that has a negative impact. So in the long run, we need to the birth rate, with the reduction of birth rate, we must take care of the female workers, females, to give more births or population increase and acceptance of some immigrants from foreign countries, as well as protection of labor workers is necessary for the old generation people and the female workers to encourage them to participate in the workforce and to make a contribution of GDP growth. That is quite necessary step to think of. So in the future, the government needs to pay attention to these security and safety for the labor workers.
Right, indeed. And against the backdrop of our shrinking workforce, so another promising finding, though, is that the number of foreign workers here in the country surpassed 900,000 last year for the first time since relevant data, I believe, was compiled back in the year 2012. What more can you tell us?
That's correct, Sunny. The latest figure in regards to Korea's foreign employment is 923,000 as of May 2023. That is the highest since Statistics Korea compiled relevant data in 2012 when the number of foreign workers was below 700,000. Also, the number of foreigners aged 15 and older stood at 1.43 million, which was up almost 9.9% on year, or almost 10%, I should say, and also was the biggest annual increase since 2012. The Statistics Agency's annual report on migrant workers and employment status for 2023, released earlier this month, looked into the details of foreigners living and working in Korea. Now, 56.8% of foreigners were male, 43.2% were female. Foreign men came to Korea mainly for employment, foreign women mainly for marriage. 64.5% among the foreigners were employed. Now, 31.8% were classified as economically inactive and 3.7% as unemployed. By industry, 44.6%, so almost half, were in the mining and manufacturing sector, 18.4% in retail, hospitality and food, 15.5% ran their own businesses or were employed in the public sector, and around 12% worked in construction. In terms of wage, 50.6%, a little over half of foreign wage earners received 2 to 3 million won a month on average. That's around 1,450 to 2,180 US dollars. Now, 62.6% of foreign wage workers said they were generally satisfied with their jobs. 12.3% expressed their will to leave their current job for a different position, and pay was the main reason, while others cited risks or intensity related to their work.
I see. And keeping that in mind, then, Professor Song, what do you propose to allow for a greater participation of foreign workers in our workplaces?
I believe the foreign, regardless of whether the labor supply was from foreign or in domestic economy, clearly from the labor supply is provided from the domestic economy, and domestic workers and the labor workers have a chance to earn the income and to make a contribution to the GDP. But foreign workers are also very essential, because as long as we are in some shortage of the labor supply, particularly the industry areas, as Soa has mentioned, some healthcare and the hospitality and the manufacturing and the mining and the construction side, clearly the domestic labor workers do not, unless they are paid very high wage, they do not participate in such a very hardworking and difficult industry. So that's why the foreign workers clearly make a very positive contribution to our GDP and our economy. That is sure. Clearly, that is true. And also, even the United States has maintained such a high level of GDP growth rate and very strong economy is because of foreign workers from South America and Middle America. That is a really big source. And clearly for South Korea, we have seen that in the first quarter, we have seen that some GDP growth rate has been surprisingly 1.3% for the quarter. So this is because of some favorable condition in the exchange rate for South Korea and some favorable export economy. But domestic economy still it's a little bit negative growth rate of the GDP, clearly. So that is a really problem. So that's why we need foreign workers' help. And in the near future or in the long run, I believe we must be willing to accept the foreign workers as our citizen. And what would be better is to encourage them or to make them feel comfortable to settle down in South Korea as our population and domestic economy.
Right, for sure, Professor Song. And as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts, Professor. And Soa here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Sunny.
Right. That ends our edition of Issues and Insiders for today. Thank you for watching and happy Labor Day.